If you tell anyone, especially the police, I will destroy your entire family. You are mine now, and you will do everything I say.
Jane Doe was one of the victims of abuse committed by rapper Jay-Z when she was just 13 years old. And in this video, we have the opportunity to hear her story, where she tells all the atrocities he did to her, and that only today, 24 years later, is she able to feel comfortable talking about the subject. Imagine a beautiful young woman, full of dreams, receives an invitation that seemed like the perfect opportunity. But in fact, this opportunity came disguised as a nightmare of something that not only destroyed her body, but also her soul. What happened to Jane Doe that night changed her life forever. Now, after 24 years of silence, she is ready to reveal her darkest secrets with all the details of what really happened. Before diving into this terrifying story, subscribe to the channel to follow more shocking stories like this. And share this video to warn others of the monster that Jay-Z is. Jane Doe's account begins like this.
For a long time, I lived in silence, not because I didn't want to talk, but because fear suffocated me. My name is Jane Doe. Today, at 37 years old, I'm here to tell you everything that the monster Jay-Z did to me. A story I kept for more than 2 decades. This is not an easy story to hear, and even less to tell, but it's a story that needs to be shared because there are other people like me who are still stuck in silence. I know you might think it took me too long to speak or think I'm lying, but everything I'm going to tell you is real, so I ask you not to say I'm lying. Just listen to what I have to say. When it all happened, I was only 13 years old. I was a girl full of dreams, fascinated by the world of music. I grew up in a simple neighborhood, but I carried with me the hope that talent could take me beyond the barriers that life had already placed in my path. It was during the 2000 MTV Video Music Awards that my life changed forever. I wasn't there as a guest, of course. I was just a teenager who dreamed of being close to the stars I saw on television. So when a driver approached me outside and said there was a special party where I could meet some of these legends, I was ecstatic. He said it would be an unforgettable night and that I shouldn't miss the chance. It was at that moment that I was taken to a dark universe, where glamour was just a facade for something much more cruel. The party was in a luxurious mansion, full of people who seemed important, but also full of people like me, young and vulnerable. Amidst the lights and loud music, a man was introduced to me. He had an almost magnetic charisma, but there was something in his gaze that made me hesitate. That man was Jay-Z. He didn't seem to see a teenage girl in front of him. He saw me as an opportunity, as something he could shape and use for his own interests. He told me that great stars start like this, with the courage to be in the right places and trust in the right people. With every word, he made me believe that I was at the beginning of something big. But I would soon discover that this beginning was a trap. At that party, I was put in situations I didn't know how to avoid. Jay-Z and others around me surrounded me with praise and promises, but their actions said something else. It was a power game, where I was the weakest piece on the board. Today, I know that what happened to me that night was never my fault. But at that time, I didn't know that. I was a child trying to understand why something so wrong could be happening in a place that was supposed to be a dream place. That was the beginning of an experience that changed my life forever. And that's what brings me here today. For the first time, I feel ready to tell everything, because I know that my story can help other people see the dangers hidden behind the shine and fame. It wasn't easy to get here, but I'm determined to expose the truth. From now on, I will share every detail of what I experienced so that you understand how Jay-Z used his power and influence to steal not only my body, but my soul. It's time to end the silence. After that party, I thought my life was changing for the better. I remember thinking, maybe this is all worth it. Maybe I really am on the right path. But I was wrong. That was the first of many nights that Jay-Z would show what it meant to be under his control. At first, he seemed friendly, almost like a mentor. He talked about how the music industry was a tough place and that in order to survive, I would need to be strong. But I soon realized that strong, in his dictionary, meant accepting anything without question. Shortly after that party, I was called to a professional meeting. It was in one of Jay-Z's private studios, a place that should be where great hits are born. When I arrived, the room was almost empty except for him and two of his assistants. Jay-Z asked me to sit down, but his tone wasn't inviting. It was an order. And even without fully understanding it, I already felt that something was wrong. He started talking about how the industry demands loyalty, submission, and sacrifice. He said that if I wanted to achieve my dreams, I would have to pay a price. At that moment, still naive, I thought he was talking about effort, hard work. But then he came over, sat down next to me, and grabbed my face with a force that made me shudder. "Do you know what happens to people who don't follow the rules, Jane?" he asked, looking straight into my eyes. I wanted to respond, but my voice just wouldn't come out. He smiled, a cold, cruel smile, and continued, "They disappear, and no one ever asks about them. Did you understand?" That was the first warning. After that day, he started imposing rules. I couldn't talk to anyone without his approval. I couldn't leave without him or his assistants knowing exactly where I was. Even what I wore was controlled. He said I needed to look the part, but I knew it was a way of making me feel smaller, as if even my identity belonged to him. The situations only got worse. One evening, he organized a small meeting in the same studio. There were other people there, but they all seemed complicit, like they knew exactly what was going on and didn't care. Jay-Z called me into a separate room and started talking about how I should trust him. He placed a glass of wine in front of me and said, "Drink, Jane, you'll need this for what comes next." When I hesitated, he became serious. "Don't you trust me?" he asked, with a tone of voice that brooked no argument. Afraid, I obeyed. At that moment, I realized that my will no longer mattered. Over the weeks, Jay-Z became increasingly cruel. He had a way of manipulating that was frightening. He never needed to scream. He used words like knives, slowly cutting through my resistance. He would say things like, "You know you'll never be anyone without me, right? I am your entry ticket. Without me, you're just another talentless girl trying to stand out." Those words left a deep impression on me because he knew exactly where to touch me to make me doubt myself. He created an environment where I thought there was no way out, and that's what he wanted. To make me believe that I needed him for everything, even to exist. One time he made me watch as he disciplined another girl who had also been taken into that circle. He humiliated her in front of everyone, saying that she had disobeyed one of his rules. I will never forget the look on her face. It was the look of someone who had already lost all hope. And Jay-Z looked at me afterwards and said, "I hope you learn from this. I don't give second chances." It was at that moment that I realized the true terror of being under his control. Jay-Z not only abused the power he had, but he also made a point of crushing any shred of dignity you still had. He wanted you to know that he was the only one in control, the only one who could decide your future. And so I found myself trapped in a cycle of fear and manipulation, not knowing how to escape. But that wasn't the worst part. There was more, much more. And little by little, I will tell you everything he did to me. After weeks under Jay-Z's control, I no longer knew what freedom was. He had become a constant presence in my life, directly or indirectly. Even when he wasn't physically around, his rules and orders surrounded me like invisible bars. He had a cold, calculated method of making sure I never thought about running away. It all started with small gestures that seemed innocent. A driver always picked me up and took me wherever he wanted. I wasn't allowed to use public transportation or walk alone. "It's for your safety," he would say. But I knew it was another way of isolating myself. One of the cruelest things he did was separate me from anyone who could help me. He always found a way to push away anyone who tried to get close. One day, I tried to talk to another girl who also seemed to be under his control. We only spoke for a few minutes before one of Jay-Z's assistants entered the room and told us to shut up. He later confronted me. "You're not here to make friends, Jane. You are here to learn. Any distractions will be eliminated." He said it with such a cold tone that it made me shiver. But isolation wasn't enough for him. Jay-Z wanted total control. He started to decide what I wore, what I ate, and even what I said. He would make comments about my appearance, saying I should look presentable at all times. One time he looked at me and said, "You need to understand that your image reflects mine. Don't make me look bad." These moments were humiliating, but the hardest part was when he turned everything into some kind of game. He liked to put me in situations where I needed to prove my loyalty. This usually happened at private parties, where he and his friends watched me like I was a toy. One night, he took me to the corner of the room and said, "Jane, today you're going to show that you really deserve to be here." He then ordered me to accompany a much older man, saying he was an important guest and that I should be polite to him. When I hesitated, he leaned in close and said quietly, "I won't do it again. Do as I ask, or you will never be invited to these meetings again." I didn't know what to do. My mind was in a panic, but I saw no way out. If I tried to refuse, I knew there would be consequences. He always made that very clear. These were not just implied threats. They were promises that my life would be destroyed if I didn't follow their orders. Over time, these moments became more and more frequent. He used these situations to break me, to make me understand that I was just a piece in his game. And worse, he did it with a smile on his face, like he was having fun. Jay-Z didn't need to raise his voice or make big gestures to control me. He used subtle words, looks, and actions to keep me in a constant state of fear. He wanted me to know that he was in charge, that my life depended on his decisions. What haunted me most was the fact that no one around seemed to care. People at parties looked but never did anything. It was as if everyone was used to it, as if it were normal. And this only increased the feeling of despair because it made me believe that there was no one I could ask for help. Little by little, I began to realize that the only way to survive was to find a way out. But how? I had no money, no connections, and most importantly, I had no courage. Jay-Z had stolen all of that from me. He had turned me into someone I barely recognized, but even in the midst of that nightmare, a small part of me still believed that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. I just needed to figure out how to find her. And as incredible as it may seem, I couldn't escape. As the days turned into weeks, Jay-Z began to test the limits of his control over me. Every word he said seemed loaded with hidden intentions, as if it were part of a cruel game where only he knew the rules. Once he called me late in the afternoon for a meeting at the studio. I thought it would be about music, something that would remind me why I agreed to enter this world. But when I arrived, he was sitting on a leather sofa with a glass of whiskey in his hand and a smile that made me freeze. "Do you know why you are here, Jane?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was something threatening in the way he looked at me. Before I could respond, he continued, "I'm invested in you, and like any investment, I expect a return. Are you ready to show me that you're worth it?" I tried to ask what he meant, but he just laughed. "Oh, Jane, you are so innocent. It's even funny." He placed the glass of whiskey on the table and stood up, slowly walking towards me. "Let me put it simply. You do as I say, or this all goes away. It's that easy." He moved closer, so close that I could smell the strong alcohol on his breath. "Do you think you can just leave? Do you think you can refuse? I know everything about you. I know where you live. I know about your family. Don't test my patience, Jane. You won't like the result." I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but something inside me was frozen. It was as if he had stolen my ability to react. He knew this and used it against me. After that conversation, he started making requests. Things that seemed small at first, but were clearly designed to test how far I was willing to go. He would send me to get drinks for him and his friends at parties, always making sure I heard the nasty comments they made. He asked me to smile and look happy, even when I was on the verge of breaking down. One day, he took it even further. During a party at his mansion, he told me to sit next to one of the guests and keep him company. I knew what that meant. My heart started beating so fast that I thought I was going to faint. When I tried to protest, he just tilted his head and said, "You don't want to disappoint me, do you?" The humiliation was unbearable. But I did as he said, because in my mind, I had no choice. He had built an invisible prison around me, one where every decision seemed to lead down a dead end. Jay-Z didn't just use words to control me. He used fear, manipulation, and most of all, power. He knew that as a teenager alone in an unfamiliar world, I had no one to turn to. And he made the most of it. But even at that moment, deep in my heart, I knew I needed to find a way to escape. I just didn't know how. Not yet. But something told me that if I didn't leave soon, he would end up taking everything that was left from me. As time went on, it became clear that Jay-Z was using his mentor image as a tool to keep me under control. He knew exactly how to present himself as a guide, someone who wanted to help, but it was all just a facade to manipulate and subjugate. After every party or gathering, he always found a way to remind me that I was there because of him. "You're lucky to be here, Jane," he'd say. "I see potential in you, something no one else sees. But potential alone is not enough. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes." Those words were like a constant warning. Either I followed what he wanted or he would discard me. With each conversation, he made me believe that without him, I would have no future. And worse, he made a point of creating situations to reinforce this point. One time, he called me into the studio under the guise of learning about the industry. When I arrived, he was there with a small group of people who seemed as influential as he was. He made me sit next to him as he started talking about business, about how he had built his empire. It was fascinating to listen to, but the tone of his voice was always the same, authoritative, domineering. After a while, he turned to me and said, "Jane, do you know what everyone in this room has in common? They are loyal. They understand that to get to the top, you have to follow the rules. My rules." He then placed his hand on my shoulder and continued, "I'm going to be honest with you. There are many people who would like to be in your place, lots of. So if you don't want it anymore, just tell me. But know that if you leave, no one will help you. And do you know why? Because they know I control everything." That was his trick. He never needed to shout or directly threaten. He used innuendo and emotional manipulation to make me believe I was trapped, that he was the only person who could give me a future. Another time, he took me to a recording session with a famous artist. It was supposed to be an exciting time, a chance to learn from professionals. But it soon became clear that I wasn't there to learn. Jay-Z ignored me throughout the session, speaking only to the artist and his producers. When he finished, he took me aside and said, "Do you see what happened here today? You will only reach this level if you learn to listen and obey. Don't question. Just trust me." That was the first time I really understood how much he liked to play with my mind. He made it seem like he was helping me, when in reality, he was conditioning me to accept whatever he demanded. The worst part was the way he used moments of kindness to confuse me. He praised me in public, made it seem like I was special. "You have something other people don't have, Jane," he would say, "but that only matters if you know how to use it." These moments left me in a constant state of confusion. How could I hate someone who sometimes seemed to believe in me? But then he would be the same cold, calculating man again, reminding me that I was nothing without him. It was a never-ending cycle of manipulation, where every little act of kindness was used as a weapon to keep me under control. He was a master at creating dependency, at making you feel like you had no other option than to stay and follow his rules. I knew I needed to leave, but the question was how? How to escape from someone who seemed to have the whole world on their side. The more time passed, the more Jay-Z made a point of demonstrating the control he had over me. My every move felt supervised, every decision filtered by his rules. It was like he was playing God, testing how far he could go before breaking me completely. One day, he called me to an urgent meeting at one of the mansions he used for parties. I already knew what this meant. It wasn't a meeting, but another test to prove that I was under his control. When I arrived, he was sitting at the table with some of his assistants, but unlike the other times, there was also a group of men I had never seen before. He made me sit next to him, placing his hand on my shoulder as if he was marking his territory. "Jane, I want you to meet some important people. These people have the power to change your life, or end it. It all depends on how you behave today." My throat dried up. He didn't need to say anything else. The message was clear. During the meeting, he ignored me most of the time, but every moment he looked in my direction, as if checking to see if I understood my place there. After the meeting, he called me into a smaller room. He seemed calm, but it was the kind of calm that made my skin crawl. "You did well today, Jane," he said, walking slowly around me, "but it's still not at the level I need. You know what that means, don't you?" I didn't know what to answer. He leaned in close to my face and whispered, It means you need to prove to me that you're taken, that she's willing to do whatever it takes to stay here. These situations began to become more frequent. He made a point of creating moments where I felt completely vulnerable, where every decision felt like a dead end. It was as if he took pleasure in watching my despair. One night, during a particularly influential party, he called me upstairs. When I arrived, he was alone, sitting in an armchair with a glass in his hand. He asked me to close the door. "Jane, I'm running out of patience," he said bluntly. "I need to know if you're willing to follow my rules or if I'm going to have to find someone more trustworthy." I tried to argue to say I was doing my best, but he interrupted me. "Your best is not enough," he said with a tone of voice that seemed to cut through the air. "Do you want me to believe you? So show me that I can trust you. Now." The way he said it was calculated. He didn't shout. He didn't make explicit threats. He simply put me in a position where the only answer seemed to be to obey. It was a perverse game of domination where he was the only winner. The scariest thing was how he managed to involve other people in this cycle of control. On one occasion, he asked one of his assistants to take me to an event, saying it would be good for my career. When I arrived, I realized that the event was nothing like they had promised. It was another situation where I was surrounded by people who seemed complicit, while Jay-Z watched from afar, like a director watching his own play. Every day that passed, I felt like I was losing more of myself. He was molding me in his image, taking away my ability to decide, to resist. But even in that darkness, a small part of me still wanted to fight, still wanted to escape. I just needed to find the right moment. After months of living under Jay-Z's control, I reached a point where I knew I couldn't escape alone. The manipulation and fear had left me completely paralyzed, but a part of me still believed there was a way out. It was then that I made the most difficult decision, telling my family everything. Until that moment, I hadn't said anything. How could I? For them, the idea of me having contact with someone as powerful as Jay-Z was a source of pride. They believed that I was fulfilling a dream, that I was being guided by one of the biggest names in music, but I knew that if I didn't speak out, things would only get worse. One night, I sat down with my parents and started telling them what was really happening. Each word was like a weight lifting off my chest, but at the same time, the fear of how they would react consumed me. At first, they were in shock. My mother put her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back the tears. My father got up, pacing back and forth, unable to believe what he was hearing. "That can't be true, Jane. He's a famous, respected man," my father said, almost trying to convince himself. I held his hands and looked into his eyes. "I'm not lying. He manipulates me, controls me, and I can't take it anymore. Please, you need to believe me." It was my mother who broke the silence. "We're going to get out of here. We can't stay another day. If he is all that you say, we are not safe." My father was still hesitant, but deep down he knew my mother was right. Jay-Z was too powerful. Even if we wanted to go to the police, who would believe a teenager against someone like him? We knew he had connections everywhere, that he could easily debunk my story and make our lives hell. In less than a week, we packed everything we could carry and left the city. There were no goodbyes. We didn't tell anyone. We simply disappear, as if we had never existed. In the first days in the new city, we lived in fear. Every knock on the door, every phone that rang made our hearts race. We had a feeling he would find us, that he wouldn't let this happen cheaply. My mother was always alert, looking out the window as if expecting to see someone watching us. My dad barely slept, worried about what he would do if Jay-Z really came after us. And me? I carried the guilt of having put my family in this situation, but I also felt a small relief at finally being away from that world. We started a new life, but we never talked about what happened. It was like it was a dark secret that we all agreed to bury. We didn't trust anyone. Even making friends felt dangerous, because deep down we always feared that somehow Jay-Z would find out where we were. This fear followed us for years. He was always there, like a shadow that never disappeared. Every time I heard his name on TV or saw one of his songs playing, I felt a knot in my stomach. I knew he was still out there, living his life without consequences, while we were the exiles, in hiding, trying to rebuild what he had destroyed. Despite this, being with my family is what kept me strong. They believed in me when no one else would, and they helped me escape something that could have destroyed my life forever. But even far away, I knew I wasn't completely free yet. The fear of Jay-Z never left me, and the silence we maintained was both a protection and a prison. For many years, I lived in silence. After my family and I left everything behind, our priority was simply surviving. Starting over somewhere else, pretending none of this had happened, was the only way to move forward. But the fear never went away. Every time I heard Jay-Z's name, it was like everything came back. The memories, his looks, the words he used to manipulate me. Everything came flooding back, as if it had happened the day before. My mother said it was better to leave the past in the past, that no one would believe me, and that it was too powerful to face. And for a long time I agreed with her. It was easier to convince myself that silence was a form of protection. But silence was also a prison. No matter how much we tried to start over, there was always a weight on us. I wondered what would have happened to other girls who passed through his hands. Did they manage to escape? Were they still stuck in that cycle of abuse and manipulation? As the years passed, I tried to bury the memories and move on. But the truth is, you never forget something like that. Abuses like the ones I suffered leave deep marks, invisible to the world, but impossible to ignore for those who carry them. It was only recently, when I saw other victims coming forward, that something inside me changed. I realized that I wasn't alone, that there were people who were finally finding the courage to speak out. They inspired me to do the same, even though the fear was still there, reminding me of what could happen. Today, I decided to tell my story because I know that silence only benefits those who abuse power. I'm still scared, of course. Fear of not being believed, fear of reliving everything that happened, fear of what he or the people around him might do. But I also know that my story can help others find their voice. Reporting something like this is not easy. It's like opening a wound that never completely healed. But at the same time, it is liberating. It's a chance to take back some of the control he stole from me so many years ago. I want other people who have gone through what I went through to know that they are not alone. That no matter how powerful someone may seem, the truth always has value. And now, after so long living in fear, I finally feel like I'm ready to face the past. Not to get revenge, but to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Jay-Z may have used his power to silence me, but today, my voice is stronger than any control he ever exerted, and I will keep talking no matter what.